Welcome to Unbound, the podcast with Beth Curry, author, storyteller, and survivor. This is where books meet real life, where Beth reads chapters from her work and breaks free from the traditional audiobook format, diving deeper into the personal experiences, lessons, and liberation behind every page. Nothing is off limits. Let's get unbound.
Hi, welcome back to Unbound. I'm your host, Beth Curry. Hi. So today we're going way back to the years before my mom returned to teaching full-time. When she was home with two littles, making bologna rolls with mustard and explaining where the sun goes at night. What I discovered in this conversation, the memories that stick aren't always the ones you expect. My mom can't always remember that she has two daughters, but she remembered about a lampshade. You'll find out in a minute. She might forget John exists, but she remembers how I used to like my bologna rolled up with mustard and no bread. Chapter 22 is called The Early Years, and it's about the strange selectivity of memory and dementia. Why some details persist in this crystal clear space, and then entire people just sometimes vanish. It's about something harder to talk about. What it means when the person with dementia consistently forgets one child but remembers the other. It's not just about neural pathways and frequency of visits, It's about a relationship being erased one memory at a time. Kind of sucks. Anyway, this is chapter 22 in the book, The Early Years. Today I arrived at Willow Grove with a different agenda. Instead of bringing photos or music to spark conversation, I wanted to try something new, to see what memories might surface if I simply asked Mom about our early years together, before she returned to work full-time. Those years when Jennifer and I were small, when her days revolved around managing our home and caring for us, remain largely undocumented in family photos. I was curious what might still exist in her memory from that time, what moments had embedded themselves deeply enough to withstand dementia's erosion. She was awake when I arrived, sitting up in her chair in the dining room, rather than napping as she often is during my visits. So I joined her at the table. This alertness felt promising, like finding an open door when you expected it to be locked. "Hi, Mom," I said. "I thought we could talk about when I was little today, before you went back to teaching. Do you remember those days?" Something shifted in her expression, a brightening, an engagement that suggested this question had found purchase in her mind. "Of course I remember," she said, her voice carrying unusual certainty. "You were such a funny little thing." "What do you remember about me then?" I asked, deliberately keeping the question open-ended, curious what would emerge without prompting. "You used to kneel right in front of the big TV to watch Sesame Street," she said immediately, a specific detail I hadn't anticipated but remembered in that moment. "I always told you to move back, that you'd hurt your eyes, but you wanted to be close to all those puppets." This memory rang true. Our large console television with its wooden finish, my fascination with the colorful characters on screen. I could almost feel the carpet under my knees, the warmth of the TV glass near my face, and the static if I dared touch the screen. "What about food? Did I have favorite things to eat back then?" She smiled, another memory clearly accessible. "Bologna with mustard. Not in sandwiches. You wanted it rolled up. I always had to have bologna in the fridge for you." I laughed, having completely forgotten this childhood preference. I barely eat bologna now. "That's because you ate so much of it then," she replied with surprising quickness. "You'd eat it every day if I let you." We continued this way, me asking general questions about those early years, her retrieving specific details I had either forgotten or never known were significant enough to remember. The visit took on a different quality than our usual interactions, more fluid, more connected, her responses coming without the long pauses and vacant stares that often punctuate our conversations now. Then I attempted to broaden the discussion. "What about Jennifer? What do you remember about her from those days?" Her expression changed immediately, confusion replacing certainty. "Jennifer?" "My sister," I prompted gently. "Your older daughter." She shook her head slowly. "I don't remember a Jennifer." This wasn't the first time she failed to recall Jennifer, but it still created a hollow feeling in my chest. Jennifer visits less frequently than I do, but some might say I visit too much, especially since I've started this book. I've noticed over the past year that Mum mentions her less and less, and when directly asked, often responds with the same blank confusion. "She's my older sister," I tried again, watching her face carefully. "You had her before me." Mum looked genuinely perplexed, almost distressed by this information that couldn't find a corresponding memory to attach to. I don't remember having another daughter. Dementia specialists have explained to me that this isn't uncommon. People with cognitive decline often retain clearer memories of those they see regularly, while those who visit less may fade from recognition more quickly. The neural pathways maintained through regular contact remain somewhat accessible, while those rarely traveled become overgrown and harder to reach. It's not about love or importance, but simply about recency and frequency of reinforcement. Fortunately, seeing the person they don't remember by name can completely erase all the surface forgetfulness. Understanding this intellectually doesn't make it less painful to witness, however. Jennifer and Mum had their own complex relationship over the years, as you've read in the previous chapter. Now that relationship exists primarily in Jennifer's memory alone. The shared history no longer mutually accessible. It's yet another form of loss and a journey defined by incremental griefs. Not wanting to cause Mum distress by insisting on something she clearly couldn't recall, I redirected the conversation. Do you remember when I had chicken pox? The question sparked immediate recognition. Oh yes, you were missing so much school. Grade 1, I think. You were learning about whales in your class. Was I? I couldn't recall this detail. Yes, and you were so upset about missing it, so we did our own whale lessons in the bathtub. She smiled at this memory, clearly seeing it play out in her mind. You had spots everywhere, poor thing, but you were more concerned about missing the whales at school. I marveled at the specific detail in this recollection, not just that I had chicken pox, but that I was studying whales, that she had created home lessons to compensate for my missed school. The bathtub setting, the educational improvisation, these details painted a picture of motherhood I recognized from my own experience with crew. That instinct to turn even difficult situations into opportunities for learning and connection. You were always curious, she continued, building on this memory, like when you saw that Sesame Street episode about the sun disappearing into the ocean. I shook my head, not recalling this particular incident. You were very concerned about where the sun actually went at night, she explained. They showed it sinking into the ocean on the show, and you took it very literally. So I got your pink and blue polka-dotted lampshade from your bedroom and an orange from the kitchen. We went into the bathroom and turned off the lights so I could show you how the Earth moves around the sun, not the other way around. This improvised planetary model, a lampshade and an orange in a darkened bathroom, struck me as quintessentially Mom. Creative, responsive, using whatever was at hand to explain complex concepts to a curious child. The polka-dotted lampshade detail felt especially significant, such a specific memory that it could only be genuine, not confabulated. And truthfully, some faded memories of my own from this experience started to surface. I was always trying to figure things out, I said, encouraging her to continue this thread of memory. Always asking why, she agreed. Sometimes I didn't have answers, so we'd just look things up together. Your father would say, just tell her you don't know, but I wanted you to see that adults don't have all the answers, but can find them. This philosophy that not knowing was acceptable, but not seeking to know was not, had profoundly shaped my approach to the world. I hadn't realized how early this value had been instilled or how deliberately Mum had modeled intellectual curiosity. I am a question asker, and I don't let up until I'm satisfied with what I've been told. As we continued talking, a surprising shift occurred. Without my prompting or redirecting the conversation back to Jennifer, Mum suddenly mentioned her. We turned your small bedroom into a playroom at one point, she said, the memory seemingly emerging from nowhere. You and Jennifer shared her bigger room for sleeping. Yes, I said, perhaps too enthusiastically, not wanting to lose this thread. That's right, Jennifer and I shared a room for a while. You two fought a lot, she said with a small laugh, always bickering over space, over toys. Jennifer had those Barbies she would barely let you touch. I preferred baby dolls anyway, I added, relieved to see this recognition of Jennifer continuing. Yes, you were always nurturing that way. Jennifer liked fashion dolls, changing their clothes and hairstyles. Different interests from the beginning. For a brief, precious moment, Mum held both her daughters in her memory simultaneously. Jennifer existed again in her consciousness, not just as a name I was trying to force her to recognize, but as a real person with specific preferences, a distinct personality that contrasted with my own. It felt like a small miracle, this temporary parting of the fog that had obscured her firstborn from her awareness. But like many such moments in dementia, it didn't last. Within minutes, she was again speaking as if I were her only child, the memory of Jennifer slipping away as quickly as it had surfaced. I didn't try to correct her or reintroduce Jennifer into the conversation, knowing from experience that such attempts often create confusion and distress rather than clarity. Instead, I followed where her memories led, which turned out to be the church nursery where she had volunteered for many years. I loved working with the babies of the church, she said, her face softening at this recollection, singing lullabies to them while their parents were in the service. You had such a beautiful singing voice, I said, remembering how she would sing the same lullabies to me, to neighbor children, eventually to Crew when he was small. You used to help me in the nursery sometimes, she continued. You had a way with the fussy ones, patient, even as a young girl. This memory aligned with others she had shared before, her perception of me as nurturing, as someone who connected easily with children and babies. Whether entirely accurate or somewhat enhanced by maternal pride, this characterization had been consistent throughout her life and remained intact even as other memories fragmented. As our visit continued, I noticed a pattern in the memories that remained most vivid for her. They tended to center around moments of teaching, the whale lessons during chickenpox, the sun and earth demonstration, helping in the nursery. The mother she remembered herself being was the one who taught, explained, demonstrated, nurtured curiosity and learning. Even as she eventually returned to formal teaching as a career, those early expectations of teaching her own children seemed to have imprinted deeply in her memory. There was poignancy in this realization. The professional identity she had cultivated early, and then a little later in life, had roots in these intimate moments of motherhood. The teacher she became in classrooms had first emerged in bathroom whale lessons and darkened bathroom astronomy demonstrations. Something essential about how she understood herself as someone who explained, who illuminated, who made the complex understandable, had been formed in these everyday interactions with her children. And while Jennifer faded in and out of these recollections, sometimes present, sometimes absent, Mum's sense of herself as a teaching, nurturing presence remained stable. This core identity persisted even as specific relationships became confused or forgotten. Toward the end of our visit, as her energy began to wane and her responses grew shorter, I found myself reflecting on the strange selectivity of memory and dementia. Why did the pink and blue polka-dotted lampshade remain when Jennifer sometimes disappeared entirely? Why did rolled bologna with mustard persist while other seemingly more significant details faded? The patterns defied simple explanation, suggesting neural pathways we can barely begin to understand. The only thing I could think of was it was because I was there, and when I'm there, Mum makes things about me, even as I'm trying to make it about her. What did seem clear, however, was that emotional significance played a crucial role in what remained accessible. The memories that surfaced most readily weren't necessarily the most objectively important, but rather those that carried the strongest emotional resonance, moments of connection, of nurturing, of responding to needs and questions. The mother-child bond, in its most essential expression, remained intact in these recollections, even as names and timelines became confused. As I prepared to leave, gathering my purse and jacket, Mum reached for my hand. "You were a good little girl," she said, her voice carrying that particular clarity that sometimes emerges unexpectedly. "Always thinking, always wondering about everything." "I had a good mother," I replied, squeezing her hand gently. "Someone who took the time to answer all those questions." She nodded, seemingly pleased with this exchange. Then, in a moment of startling lucidity, she added, "Jennifer was different." The mention of Jennifer, unprompted and clear again, felt like a gift at the end of our visit. Another brief window where both her children existed equally in her awareness. I didn't comment directly, not wanting to risk closing this window by drawing attention to it. I also didn't want to ask what she meant by different. I know my sister and I are different. She's quieter. I'm louder. She was more cautious, and I was more rebellious. Both of us funny in our own ways, both of us kind. But I carried the moment with me as I left Willow Grove, a reminder that beneath the confusion and forgetting, connections remain, changed, fragmentary, but not entirely lost. Driving home, I thought about memory's strange landscape and dementia. Not a uniform fading, but a selective preservation, with some areas remaining relatively intact while others erode completely. Mum remembered teaching me, but inconsistently remembered having 2 daughters. Yet, in unexpected moments, both these realities could coexist. The visit had given me a peek at a mother I barely remembered, the young woman who stayed home with small children, who created impromptu science demonstrations, and who made meals we all loved, It had also shown me that early version of her connected to the woman she later became professionally, how motherhood and teaching were intertwined threads in her identity. She even brought my own faded or forgotten memories to the surface. Most significantly, though, it had revealed something crucial about memory and dementia. That what persists often reflects not what we might consider most objectively important, but what carried the deepest emotional significance in the lived experience. The everyday moments of nurturing, explaining, connecting, these had embedded themselves into Mum's memory in ways that withstood even dementia's relentless erosion. The bittersweet reality of Jennifer's inconsistent presence in these memories was difficult to accept, but important to understand. It wasn't about love or importance, but simply about the neurological reality of pathways maintained through regular reinforcement versus those that fade without frequent use. In this, as in so many aspects of dementia care, judgment gives way to compassion. For Jennifer, who visits when she can, for Mom, whose brain is following its own inscrutable patterns of preservation and loss, and for myself, navigating the complex emotional terrain where these realities intersect. As I pulled into my driveway, I made a mental note to share these early childhood memories with Jennifer. The playroom conversation, the Barbie dolls she often guarded from her little sister, the contrasting ways Mom perceived their personalities from the beginning. In this way, I could become a bridge between them, carrying memories back and forth across the growing divide that dementia had created. Not a perfect solution, but another way of honoring connections that matter, even as they change from under the pressure of this relentless condition. Okay, so let's chat. So when I asked my mom about the early years, those days when Jen and I were little and she was home with us, something kind of shifted in her face. Like I had found the right frequency on a radio and suddenly the signal came through clear, right? When she said she remembered, and it was such a funny little thing, and then she just started talking, specific details, these unprompted things, me kneeling in front of the big console TV. Those things were like 179,000 pounds or something. I remember those big beasts. My obsession with bologna, the chicken pox thing, they weren't vague recollections. They were vivid memories with like a texture. The kind of details that can only come from genuine recall, I think, like just none of this confabulation stuff. And what struck me, the memories were teaching moments, the whale lessons and the lampshade and answering my endless why questions, instead of just telling me to stop asking. Even in her broken up memory, that version of herself that sticks around is the teacher. It's the nurturer and the mom who explained things. But then the confusion around her remembering Jen. Like, the thing I've been watching happen for a long time now, maybe, longer, my sister just kind of disappearing, it makes me really sad. Like, it makes me sad for both of them. She surfaces sometimes, absolutely, unprompted, clear as day, but more and more often, I get the blank confusion, especially now. People retain clearer memories. I've talked about this. I think it was Nancy, one of the listener comments, where she was taking care of her mom, and she didn't have as close a relationship with her mom prior, but her brothers did. And then when she kind of took over caring for her mom kind of lessened her thoughts and feelings about her brother and was more into Nancy. So, again, like that's what they see regularly, right? So, those who visit less frequently fade a little bit faster. And like I said, it's not about love, it's not about importance. It's the brain. It's completely the brain. The connections that, are reinforced regularly stay accessible. And I've talked about like Jen visiting less and other friends visiting less or not at all, and other family members too. Like, the visits are brutal. I'm not judging anybody at all, and not everyone can or should show up the same way at all. But the consequence of that is difference in frequency. Just not being there in mom's mind as much. It sucks. It really sucks. But there was a moment during this visit that gave me hope, when she just, like, unprompted remembered Jen. Like, no problem. There she was, Jen, existing again. And not because I forced her into the conversation, but, like, that memory surfaced naturally. she had both of us in her mind at the same time. And she remembered the Barbies and us fighting and all that kind of stuff. And, both her kids existed equally in her awareness in that very brief window. And it was awesome. This pattern, though, again, I'm going to talk about ambiguous loss. It looks like that in real time. It sucks. Jen's there and then not there, present in mom's history, but then absent from current recall, existing in these pieces that kind of surface randomly and then disappear, Jen's being forgotten by someone, for Jen, like this ambiguous loss. She's losing her mom's recognition of her while her mom is still alive. And she's being forgotten by someone who's still here and still breathing and still sitting in that chair at Willow Grove. And that's a specific kind of grief that has no resolution. And you can't fully mourn someone who's still alive. You can't connect with someone who doesn't remember you exist. I don't know how to make that better. I don't know if there's anything I can do to make it better. But, I'll just keep showing up and when mom remembers Jen unprompted, I can just treasure that moment for both of them. So the lampshade, this detail keeps messing with me. So mom explaining it and like the details, this pink and blue polka dotted lampshade, like not just a lampshade, the pattern and the colors, emotional resonance matters more than objective importance, I think. So that science lesson, that moment when mom felt like herself, where she was doing the thing that she was meant to do and teaching and explaining and all of that moment reinforced her core identity in a way that's deeply embedded. So, that came to her and, Jennifer didn't. That's a relationship which is more complex and more dependent on ongoing reinforcement. It's more vulnerable to fading. And it's not fair. It's not logical, but that's how it works. It doesn't preserve what we think is most important. It preserves what carried the strongest emotional charge in the moment. It was encoded, right? Does that make sense? Something else I realized, the mother my mom remembers being is very specific. She remembers those teaching moments, those nurturing moments, responding to my endless curiosity, helping in the church nursery with the babies and creating those impromptu lessons for Jen and I. That identity has roots in these early motherhood moments and in her like education and stuff. Like she was at teacher's college when she was only 17. So, the instinct to explain and to make complex things understandable, that all started, then early. Like she really got to implement it once she had us. And that version of herself, the teacher, all of that, it sticks around even when, relationships become confused. And in some ways she hasn't lost her sense of self. And I don't know. I think that's good. She's lost some of the people in her life, but not permanently. The core of who she is still there, though. It's kind of just buried under that confusion. So anyway, some people might wonder, because I've had some questions. I'm not going to go into specifics of who's had them. Is it okay that I, keep showing up when Jen doesn't as much? And I'm kind of reinforcing this dynamic where I'm remembered and she's not. And look, I've asked myself this question 100 times. Should I visit less so the difference isn't so stark? Should I talk about Jennifer more to keep her present in mom's mind? But what I've landed on with this is that I can't control my mom's neural pathways. All I can control is whether I show up. And showing up, like that's what I need to do for me, for my relationship with my mom, regardless of what's happening with Jen's or like mom's other friends or other family members. I can't fix what's being lost between them. I can only maintain what still exists between us. Does that feel selfish sometimes? Yeah. It feels very unfair to Jen, for sure, but I can't sacrifice my time with my mom out of some misguided attempt at fairness, if that makes sense. It's one of those situations where there is no good answer, just a series of these imperfect choices that we all navigate as best we can. So here's what I'm sitting with after this visit. And, it might seem repetitive. Memory in dementia is wildly selective. It preserves certain things and erases others, and it holds on to teaching moments and all that. And the people who get remembered most, clearly, aren't necessarily the most loved or the most important. They're just the ones whose neural pathways get reinforced most frequently through that ongoing contact. It's not judgment, it's just biology. Knowing the biology doesn't make it hurt less, though, when you kind of see it happening. If you're dealing with this, if you're the child who's being forgotten while a sibling is being remembered, or if you're the one who's remembered and feeling guilty about it, I see you. The situation is completely fucked in ways that have no good resolution, right? Like, all we can do is show up when we can and forgive ourselves when we can't, and understand that dementia doesn't play fair with anyone. There's no favorites, not the person who has it, not their kids, not their relationship. Like, it's just some memories stick and some fade and some come and go. And, we just have to ride it out. Kind of being thankful for the clarity when it comes, and accept the confusion when it doesn't, The early years my mom remembers aren't the complete picture. Jen fades in and out of them. And I probably do too. Like, when I'm not sitting there, like, I would probably have to ask other people what that looks like when I'm not there. But her memories, they're real nonetheless, right? Genuine moments of connection and evidence that she was there and present and engaged with her kids in ways that mattered. And, that's what I hold on to. Not the perfect recall of every detail or every person, but the evidence that love and care and curiosity were all kind of woven through those years. The full picture is breaking apart, but the essence remains. And I think that's what matters. So that's it. Thanks for listening to Unbound. Support and contact info are in the show notes. Please join the Facebook group for discussion, and I will see you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to Unbound with Beth Curry. Join the conversation in the Facebook group or visit authorbethcurry.com. Want to support the show? Head to ko-fi.com/unbound podcast. Until next time, stay unbound.